Housework and child rearing are the wife's responsibilities. By pushing all of that onto your husband, you're failing as a wife, my mother-in-law declared, unable to accept that her son was involved in household chores and parenting. She added, "Don't forget how your life is being supported. It's thanks to your husband that this household runs smoothly. Aren't you lacking in gratitude?" The other day, she even remarked, "I did the laundry. I'm not just a helper around the house." My husband remained silent, never once defending me. Instead, he warned, "If I ever wanted a divorce, you and our daughter wouldn't manage on your own. Understand that." Feeling harshly criticized and belittled by both my husband and mother-in-law, I reached my breaking point. I'm Katie, a 30-year-old office worker. I met my husband Gary in college and we started dating soon after. As we both transitioned into working adults, marriage seemed like the natural next step. Shortly after our wedding, our daughter was born, and I changed jobs due to the irregular hours at my previous one. Now I work full-time with fewer overtime demands. What I didn't realize before getting married was that my husband had a strong attachment to his mother. He consulted her on almost every decision. When we were searching for a new house, I was surprised to find that he brought his mother along to viewings. "This apartment is spacious and well located, easy for shopping. Why not choose this one?" she suggested. "What do you think, Mom? Is this place good?" he asked, valuing her opinion over mine. When she commented that the sunlight might not be ideal and perhaps we should consider another place, he readily agreed. Our decisions as a couple were constantly overshadowed by her preferences. Eventually, we settled on a place that she approved of, which I also liked. But the entire process left me feeling uneasy. The same pattern occurred when choosing furniture and appliances. My mother-in-law always accompanied us. I hinted to my husband that we should make these decisions on our own, hoping to establish some independence as a couple. However, he didn't take the hint, continuing to appreciate his mother's presence and advice. This wasn't the only sign of his attachment to her. He often skipped dinner at home, presumably to eat with his mother, which I didn't mind due to my busy schedule. I didn't want to be seen as a nagging wife either. Years into our marriage, as our daughter grew up, we started discussing building a new house. Though my husband had always been a bit of a mama's boy, he was also gentle and uncomplaining when she wasn't around. He was great with our daughter too. I longed for a peaceful new home for just the three of us, my husband, our daughter, and me. So when he suddenly suggested that we live with his mother, I was completely opposed to the idea. "Mom's getting on in years, and I'm worried about her future. How about we live together with her?" he proposed. His mother likely wanted to live with her son and grandchild, but I was adamantly against the idea. She never listened to my opinions, and I always had to be careful not to offend her. She spoiled my husband and clearly saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. Living together would mean seeing each other every day, something I desperately wanted to avoid. "But your mom doesn't want to move far from her current home, right?" I countered, knowing she preferred to stay in the area she had lived in for years. "Yeah, she has friends there and doesn't want to move far," he admitted. "But that area is too far from our workplaces," I pointed out, knowing it would double our commute time. I wanted to live in an area that was convenient for commuting and ideal for raising kids. "Look at this place, it's close to the train station and near your mom's house. What do you think?" I showed him some options from a real estate agent, highlighting areas with plenty of parks, nature, and convenient shopping. While it meant living separately from his mother, the proximity that would allow us to visit her quickly seemed appealing to him, and he agreed with my suggestion. I felt relieved that we wouldn't have to live with my mother-in-law, but that relief was short-lived. She began visiting our house frequently, and my husband welcomed her visits, making it difficult for me to refuse them. I understood her desire to see her grandchild, but our daughter never warmed up to her and would start crying whenever she saw her. I worried this would upset my mother-in-law. Even on days off, I couldn't relax when she was around. "Can't we spend our days off just as a family?" "I always feel on edge when your mom is here," I suggested. "She's my family too." "You're the one making it awkward," he replied, offering no sympathy. Every time she came over, she criticized my cooking and housekeeping as part of her guidance. She'd nitpick my cleaning, especially when I was planning to do a thorough job over the weekend. It was exhausting to be criticized right when I was about to start cleaning, and the meals I worked hard on never seemed to suit her taste. "You don't have the basics of cooking down," "At this rate, you'll never improve," she'd say. "I'm sorry," I'd reply meekly. "It's true, your soup is always too salty. My mom's is always just right," my husband would add, joining in on his mother's complaints and starting to press me too. Normally, he didn't say anything, but when she was around, he suddenly had a lot to say. Feeling discontented with him, I decided to talk to him when my mother-in-law wasn't there. "If you have any complaints, I wish you'd tell me directly. There's no need to wait until your mother is here," I said. "I can't help it. I remember things when I hear Mom talking about them," he replied, a bit annoyed, even though he didn't mean to be hurtful. I still longed for compassion and support in her marriage, but it seemed increasingly difficult for him to understand that. Gradually, our arguments about my mother-in-law became more frequent. Around the time our daughter started first grade, I received news from my mother that my father's health was declining. Caring for him alone had become too much for her at her age, so I decided to adjust my work schedule to help with his care daily. Because of this, my husband began taking on more responsibility for our daughter. She was becoming more independent, helping around the house and understanding of my situation. I was so grateful for her. One day, my mother-in-law came over, furious, accusing me of leaving all the childcare to my husband Gary. "I'm sorry, but my father is really unwell, and my mother is elderly. I really need to be there for them," I explained, hoping she would understand. "I believe families should help each other in tough times," I continued, but my mother-in-law didn't see it that way. "Housework and childcare are a wife's job. Dumping it all on Gary, what are you thinking? If you want to care for your parents, you should still manage everything else. That's the least you can do," she scolded. I couldn't argue back. She couldn't accept her son doing housework and childcare. "Think about it. How is your life supported? It's all thanks to Gary. Don't forget that and be more grateful," she continued. Despite my own income, she insisted it was all my husband's doing, and he didn't defend me once while she was scolding me. The other day, I even had to do the laundry. "I'm not just a helper around here," he added, as if to reinforce her point. I had been so busy with work and caring for my parents that there were times when I just couldn't manage everything. I asked him for help, and while he helped without a word, it became clear he was harboring resentment. His remarks seemed deliberately aimed at escalating his mother's anger, and his attitude grew even stricter as I continued juggling housework, childcare, and caring for my parents. "I want to do my part with the chores, but sometimes it's just too difficult, and I need your help. Even if you can't take care of our child, at least take care of your own things, like tidying up after yourself," I pleaded. "What are you saying? Protecting the home is a wife's duty. Why should I have to do it? Are you trying to push your chores onto me?" he retorted, dismissing my pleas for cooperation. No matter what I said, he wouldn't understand. "Stop talking big when you don't even make as much money as I do. If I say I want a divorce and it really happens, you do realize you and our daughter won't be able to live on your own, right?" he added, his words cutting deep. I couldn't deny it. My income had decreased since I changed jobs, and now it was less than his. With a young child, I had chosen a job with fewer overtime hours rather than a higher salary. Since then, he had become increasingly unreasonable. "If you want to care for them so much, clean the house thoroughly first," he demanded, knowing full well that it was impossible for me with a full-time job. His demands extended beyond cleaning to meals as well. "This isn't enough. Don't always settle for stir-fries, and I don't want store-bought ready meals," he insisted. No matter how exhausted I was from work, skimping on dinner wasn't allowed. I was physically and mentally drained from having to prepare homemade meals daily. I lost interest in my husband, no longer asking for anything or taking care of him as much. I couldn't trust him with our daughter, so I started bringing her with me when I visited my parents. My mother adored her granddaughter and was always thrilled to see us, and my daughter loved playing with her too. "I'm happy when you bring her, but don't overdo it. You look tired." "I'm worried," my mother would say. "It's okay, Mom. I'm relieved you're here to watch her," I would reply, feeling guilty for relying on her so much. Time passed, and my father passed away. My mother and I had to manage many things, and we discussed our family's future. It turns out my father had been a wealthy man with several properties, including our large, well-maintained family home. "You'll continue living here, right, Mom?" I asked. I assumed my mother would want to stay in the family home, but she thought differently. "This house is too big for me alone," she said. Eventually, she decided to move to a flat, and I would take over the family home. After the funeral, I stayed at the family home with my daughter to sort through my father's belongings and handle inheritance matters. One day, while my mother took my daughter out, I was left alone, absorbed in my tasks. Suddenly, my mother-in-law and husband showed up at my parents' house. "Why are you here so unexpectedly? What do you want?" I asked, startled by their unannounced visit. "I heard about it. You've inherited this house, haven't you?" My mother-in-law said, her eyes greedily sizing up the mansion. "With all this space, there's no problem for all of us to live here." "What?" I couldn't grasp the meaning of her words and exclaimed in surprise. With a malicious smile, my mother-in-law continued, "We're moving in today. It's time to re-educate you properly as a daughter-in-law." Daughter-in-law? Educate? I was incredulous. It was almost laughable. I stared them down and declared, "Me, your daughter-in-law? I'm single, you know." "What are you talking about?" They seemed confused by my statement. "I've already filed for divorce, so we're strangers now. Unfortunately, there's no daughter-in-law here for you to educate." They were dumbfounded, clearly not expecting me to have actually filed for divorce. "How absurd! That's outrageous," my mother-in-law exclaimed. "It's neither absurd nor outrageous. Gary himself initiated the petition for divorce and received the summons from the court," I said calmly. "She's delusional, a wife defying her husband." My mother-in-law was fuming, her anger escalating. I had sent the response back to the court just before my father passed away. My husband had been no help during my father's illness and had only made things harder for me. My love for him had long since withered, so I agreed to the divorce by sending the papers back to the court, making his threat a reality. I had initially intended to discuss the divorce with him, but neither he nor my mother-in-law would listen. Then my father passed away and the moment was lost. As I listened to her barrage of harsh words, my patience finally snapped. Expecting a wife to obey her husband in everything is an outdated notion. "I'm neither a housekeeper nor a maid," I said firmly. I didn't care if my mother-in-law hated me anymore. I was no longer her daughter-in-law. "How dare you speak like that? Don't get above yourself," she raged, lunging at me. I tried to resist, but she was surprisingly strong. "Stop it. Let go," I shouted, struggling to break free. "How could you divorce without discussing it? Unbelievable. Such a terrible daughter-in-law, trampling on my son whom I raised." Her eyes were bloodshot with fury as she glared at me. "Come on, do something about your mother." I pleaded with my husband, but he just stood there, motionless, unable to accept the reality of the divorce. Realizing I couldn't handle this alone, I struggled with my mother-in-law as I somehow managed to call the police. Even as the officers arrived and I explained the situation, her anger showed no signs of abating. "Please calm down," the police officer said, reaching out to my mother-in-law. "Stop it, don't touch me." She reflexively brushed him off, but in the process, her hand struck the officer's face, leading to her immediate restraint. Despite this, her agitated state continued to pose a danger, so she was taken to the police station. As I watched the police car drive away, I approached my husband, who was standing there dazed. "I'll be claiming alimony for the mental anguish you caused me," I said. "Alimony?" he asked, still in disbelief. "Yes, I've recorded everything," I replied calmly. My husband stood there gaping, seemingly lost without his mother to rely on. Time passed, and one day, my ex-husband appeared at my workplace, apparently through a mutual acquaintance from university. Bad rumors about him had spread at his job. Talk of a runaway wife, mother-in-law problems, and pity for the wife circulated among his colleagues, making him uncomfortable enough to decide to resign. I was shocked to see him. His hair was unkempt, a scruffy beard covered his face, and his overall appearance was disheveled. He had fallen into gambling due to stress and was struggling financially. Given his mother's own gambling habits, his income alone wasn't enough. "It's a nuisance, you coming to my workplace," I said coldly, no longer able to muster any sympathy for him. "I told you, but you never respond when I contact you," I said firmly. "I don't want anything to do with you or your mother anymore," I asserted. "Hear me out, please. Can we reduce the child support? It's been really tough lately," he pleaded. The amount was agreed upon by both of us. "You wanted to do what was best for our child," I reminded him. He clicked his tongue in frustration, glaring at me. "Things have changed. My income is lower, And I hardly get any bonuses, he argued. I knew that if they stopped gambling, they could manage life while still paying alimony and child support, but he didn't see it that way. He wanted to shirk his responsibility as a father. Look, we're both struggling on a single income. Shouldn't we give it another try? He suggested, proposing remarriage out of financial desperation. I was utterly disgusted. His hypocritical manner of proposing infuriated me. Remarry? No way. I never want anything to do with a mama's boy like you again, I retorted. Mama's boy? He reacted, clearly not self-aware. You can't make a single decision without your mom. The house, the furniture, the appliances, you consulted her for everything, I continued. He tried to defend himself, but I cut him off. I know you always go shopping for clothes with your mom and have her pick them out for you. That's generally called being a mama's boy, you know. My ex-husband grunted as if struck by the truth of the matter. He considered himself a devoted son, but to me he was just a dependent mama's boy. And you, I added, you always used to make fun of my income. Well, that's going to end now. What do you mean? He asked, his tone filled with disbelief. Actually, I'm earning more than you now. What? That's impossible. There's no way you earn more than me, he scoffed. It's true. I got a promotion. Yes, I was recognized for my hard work at my new job and am on the path to success. He refused to accept my words, stunned. It made sense, though. He always flaunted his high salary and looked down on me. He never imagined that the wife he belittled would end up earning more than him. You don't have to believe me, but I can show you the pay stubs anytime, I said confidently, knowing that my substantial income, along with my inherited father's estate, had changed the dynamics completely. I can live comfortably without a husband. My days are now pleasantly quiet, free from his domestic demands and his noisy mother. So if that's the case, give me a share of the inherited house and other properties. I have a right to them, my ex-husband insisted. I sighed and explained, listen, inherited property isn't considered part of the marital assets. Sorry, but you have no claim to it. Damn it, this is all because you filed for divorce without my consent. He shot back. I did nothing wrong, I said firmly. It was clear he was struggling to accept the divorce. If you did nothing wrong, why did we get divorced? I was busy with the kids. Did you help at all? He demanded. You didn't do anything. That's because you didn't manage the household properly, I retorted. I asked for your help. Spouses should support each other during tough times. My love gradually faded because you failed to understand the importance of cooperation and support in a marriage. He couldn't grasp how I felt, especially when I needed support the most and didn't get it. It was unfair to expect me to handle all the household chores and childcare while working full-time. His belief that housework and child-rearing were solely a wife's responsibility showed his reluctance to share responsibilities. You're the problem for trying to involve the husband, he argued, his voice rising. His ingrained mindset, likely shaped by his mother, seemed impossible to change. Eventually, he created a scene outside my workplace and was escorted away by security guards. Later, he and his mother faced financial difficulties, losing their family home and moving into a cheap flat. They struggled to pay alimony and continued to live in poverty, unable to quit their gambling habits. Now, it's just my daughter and me living together. With help from my mother when work gets busy, we're enjoying a happier life. I've become more cheerful, smiling more often, which seems to make my daughter happy too. I used to worry constantly about my ex-husband and mother-in-law, but now I'm focused on moving forward and showing my daughter a life that's true to myself. From now on, I'll be raising my daughter alone, firmly instilling in her the values of compassion and mutual support, and teaching her to face challenges with a smile.